They told you the Vikings raided for silver, slaves, and glory. But what they never whispered, what the monks dared not write is what happened to the most vulnerable. The women, heavy with unborn life. Pregnant women were not spared, nor forgotten. Their fate was a secret, buried in blood and silence, too dark to carve into chronicles. Tonight, we open that silence. And once you hear it, you'll never look at Viking history the same way again. The first sound was the horn, long, low, and mournful. It echoed across the river valley like the cry of some ancient beast. Then came the smoke, thick and black, rising above the tree line. The Vikings had come. Their longships slid silently along the water, their dragon prows grinning, their oars cutting in perfect rhythm. At first, the villagers thought it was thunder. But thunder does not carry steel, nor laughter, nor the fire that would soon consume their homes. Inside the small timber church, a woman pressed her back against the altar, her hands trembling over the swell of her belly. She was heavy with child, perhaps 6 months along. The priest whispered prayers, the words stumbling from his lips as he tried to hide his fear. He knew what was coming. He had heard the stories, but none of those stories had spoken of what would happen to her. Here lies the forbidden truth. Chronicles recorded the burning of villages, the slaughter of men, the looting of treasures. But they did not record what happened to the pregnant women. Was it mercy? Was it cruelty? Or was it something too unspeakable to be written? The doors burst open. Shadows filled the church. The warriors moved fast, their axes glinting, their shields painted with snarling beasts. The priest was cut down where he stood. The woman tried to flee, but a hand seized her arm. She stumbled, crying out, her voice swallowed by the chaos outside. To the Vikings, captives were wealth. Women were taken as slaves, concubines, or bargaining chips. But pregnant women, their fate was more complex. Some sagas hint that they were seen as cursed, burdens too heavy for the voyage. Others suggest they were prized, their unborn child seen as both threat and opportunity. To take a woman heavy with life was to seize not only her body, but the future growing inside her. Picture the firelit village square. A group of women huddled together, some clutching children, one visibly pregnant. Warriors circle them, debating their worth. One spits, saying she is useless. Another laughs and claims her for himself. Their voices rise, clashing like steel. And all the while, she stares at the ground, silent, as though silence itself is her only weapon. Would you have begged for mercy in that moment? Or kept silent, knowing that words could not save you? The Chronicles of Fulda, written in the 9th century, record massacres where women heavy with child were cut down without pity. Archaeological digs in old Saxon lands have uncovered graves where women and unborn children were buried together, their bones charred from fire. Was this cruelty or ritual? Did the Vikings see unborn life as dangerous, unclean, or as an offering to their gods? Yet not all accounts speak of slaughter. In some sagas, captured women, pregnant or not, were taken across the sea, absorbed into Viking households. Imagine the longship's deck under a cold moon, waves slapping the hull, the woman huddled at the mast, her belly rising and falling. The warriors glance at her uneasily. If she dies, she becomes a curse. If she lives, her child becomes part of their household, half conquered. What future does that child carry? The motif of silence returns here. Silence in the chronicles, silence in the women themselves, silence in the unborn lives whose stories were never told. That silence is louder than screams. It tells us something was hidden, something the chroniclers dared not write. And then there are the darker whispers. Some rituals demanded blood. To sacrifice a pregnant woman was to offer 2 lives at once. In bogs across Denmark and Sweden, archaeologists have found the remains of women with unborn children still within them, their deaths deliberate, their bodies offerings to the gods. Were these women locals or captives dragged from foreign temples? Their silence is eternal, but their bones tell us the truth. Now pause. If you were one of those villagers watching a pregnant woman dragged away, would you have believed she was doomed, or that she carried some strange protection, a shield of life within her? The chapter builds toward its climax with an image both haunting and unforgettable. The village burns. Smoke rolls across the fields. A pregnant woman is led toward the longships, her face hidden, her belly heavy. Behind her, her home is ash. Before her, the sea yawns wide. Her fate is uncertain, death, captivity, or something darker. And in that uncertainty lies the forbidden truth. What happened to women like her has been buried by time, erased by silence, but it shaped the destiny of nations. The flames crackle, the horn sounds again, and the longships push off into the current, carrying with them not just gold and slaves, but the unborn children of the conquered, children whose blood would one day mingle with kings, children who might carry vengeance or destiny or silence. The chapter closes with a question. Whose story are we truly telling, the warriors, the unborn, or the women whose silence shaped them both? The sea was not kind to captives. The moment the longships pulled away from the burning shore, the air changed. The smoke faded into mist, the cries of the village died into silence, and the endless water spread before them like a prison without walls. The women huddled together at the center of the deck, their wrists raw from rope, their clothes stained with ash and blood. Some sobbed quietly, others stared out at the waves, numb, as if their minds had fled before their bodies. But one among them drew uneasy glances. Her belly was round, heavy, impossible to ignore. A woman carrying life in a world of death. The warriors argued over her fate. One spat and said she would not survive the crossing, that the sea would claim her and her unborn child. Another insisted she was valuable, that to bring her back alive would mean profit, perhaps favor with the gods. Their words carried across the deck, but she did not respond. Her silence was deliberate, a shield sharper than steel. Imagine it now, the creak of oars, the crash of waves, the sting of salt in the air, and amid it all, a woman rocking gently with the swell, her hand pressed to her stomach, whispering not to the warriors, but to the life within her. Would you have done the same? Whispered to the unborn child, as if it were the only soul left who might listen. The sagas never name her, but archaeology gives us clues. In ship burials across Scandinavia, bones of women have been found laid beside infants, sometimes still within the womb, sometimes cradled in tiny wooden boxes. Were these the remains of captives who died at sea, or offerings made in foreign lands, where 2 lives extinguished were thought to appease the gods? And still, there were those who survived. Captives, even pregnant ones, were not always discarded. In Viking households, slaves' thralls were the foundation of wealth. A pregnant woman was labor waiting to be born. If she lived, her child might become a servant. If she bore the child of a Viking captor, her fate was tangled even deeper. That child would be neither free nor fully enslaved, a living reminder of conquest. The longship rocked violently one night as a storm tore across the sea. Lightning split the sky, rain hammered the deck, and the warriors clung to their oars as waves threatened to capsize them. In the chaos, one of the captive women screamed a cry not of fear, but of labor. Her time had come too soon. Picture it, thunder shaking the heavens, the deck slick with rain, the warriors shouting to keep the ship afloat. And in the center of it all, a woman writhing, clutching her belly, the unborn child forcing its way into a world of fire and salt. The others gathered around her, their chains clinking, their prayers drowned by the storm. The Vikings glanced at her with terror. A birth at sea was an omen, a thing to be feared. Some whispered it was bad luck, that the gods would strike them down for carrying both the mother and the child. Others said the gods demanded it, that a new life born on salt water was a sign of destiny. The storm raged on. The child was born, weak but alive, its cries piercing the thunder. The mother collapsed, trembling but still breathing. The warriors stared in silence, their fear naked on their faces. In that moment, the pregnant captive had become something more, not just a woman, not just a slave, but a vessel of prophecy. For, in the Viking mind, omens were everywhere, and to ignore them was to invite ruin. Now pause. If you had been on that ship, with rain stinging your eyes and lightning blazing overhead, would you have seen that child as a cursor, as a sign the gods were watching? When dawn came, the storm broke. The sea lay calm, as though nothing had happened. The mother lay exhausted, the child at her breast. The warriors avoided her gaze, uneasy, for, though they carried her as a captive, she had carried something they feared and revered in equal measure. And fear, in the Viking world, was as powerful as steel. Days passed. The ship neared the northern coasts, the fjords rising like jagged teeth. For the captives, the sight of land was both relief and terror. Relief that the sea's prison was ending, terror that their true captivity was only beginning. The pregnant women, or those who had now become others, would face new fates in the longhouses. Some would be forced into labor until they collapsed. Some would be taken as concubines, their children raised half in chains. Some, whispered sagas suggest, would be offered in ritual, 2 lives given in one to appease the gods of the harvest or the storm. But all of that was still ahead. For now, as the longship slid into the shadow of the cliffs, the captives clutched their chains, their children, and their silence. The sea had not claimed them. The storm had not ended them. But the longhouse awaited, and with it, a new kind of terror. The chapter ends with a haunting image, the longship gliding into a fjord under a blood-red sunset, the captives staring at the looming shore, their faces pale, their futures uncertain, and in the midst of them, a woman cradling her newborn child, its tiny cry mingling with the crash of waves against rock. The fjord narrowed until it seemed the mountains themselves leaned down to watch the ship pass. The longship slid silently across the water, its oars rising and falling in rhythm. the dragon prow grinning as though it knew the fate of those aboard. For the captives, the sight of land brought no comfort. Smoke rose from the roofs of a settlement at the water's edge, longhouses lined against the cliff. Fires burning inside, dogs barking as the ships approached. The warriors leaped ashore, their boots splashing in the shallows, dragging the captives behind them. The air was sharp with pine and salt, the cries of gulls echoing overhead. The women stumbled through the mud, their ankles shackled, their clothes stiff with salt from the sea. And among them were the pre-Denetha ones, whose presence unsettled even the fiercest of warriors. The longhouse doors yawned open. Inside, shadows danced in firelight. The air was thick with smoke, roasting meat, and the scent of ale. Warriors boasted of their raids, slamming cups against tables, their laughter echoing through the rafters. But when the captives were dragged in, silence fell. All eyes turned to them. One woman, heavy with child, was pushed forward. The chieftain leaned back in his carved seat, his eyes sharp, his beard flecked with gray. He studied her with the same gaze he gave to treasure or livestock. His wife sat at his side, her expression unreadable, though her fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair. Here was the unspoken tension. To bring home captives was expected. It was wealth, prestige, the mark of victory. But a pregnant captive, that was dangerous. Was the child a burden, a curse, or an omen the gods themselves had delivered? In Viking belief, birth was not merely biological, it was spiritual, tangled with fate. A child born in captivity could be seen as a living reminder of conquest. But a child carried from another land, fathered by another man, could be viewed as poison in the household. And so, the pregnant women lived in a cruel paradox. Their bellies made them untouchable to some, and yet dangerously marked to others. Imagine the longhouse that night, the fire crackling, the warriors feasting, their voices rising in songs of Odin and Thor, and in the shadows, the captives huddled, the pregnant among them holding their silence. Would you, in that place, have spoken? Or would you have hidden every word, every breath, hoping invisibility might keep you alive? The sagas tell us little of these women, but archaeology again whispers truths. In burials outside Trondheim, skeletons of women have been unearthed with unborn children still within their wombs. Their remains were not burned in warrior pyres. Instead, they were buried near the thresholds of longhouses, as if their deaths were offerings, their bodies transformed into talismans to guard the home. It chills the blood to imagine. A woman forced into the ground, not as a mother, not as a wife, not even as a thrall, but as a ward against spirits. Her unborn child, silenced before its first breath, becoming part of a superstition that valued protection over life. And yet, not every tale ends in ritual death. Some captives survived long enough to give birth inside Viking households. The sagas whisper of concubines, of women taken into the beds of warriors, their children raised as part of the household. Some of these children grew strong, serving as thralls, others becoming warriors themselves, their mixed bloodlines shaping the history of regions from Ireland to Iceland. One story, half lost in the Icelandic land Mobach, speaks of a woman carried from the British Isles, already heavy with child. She gave birth in her master's hall, her son raised among the chieftain's household, and though she remained a thrall, her descendants became part of Iceland's founding families. Her name was never recorded, only her silence. The motif of silence returns here, stronger than ever. These women were stripped of their voices in life, and stripped of their names in death. Yet their blood survived, a whisper, hidden in the veins of those who came after. But survival came at a price. The longhouse was a crucible. Inside its smoky rafters, hierarchy was absolute. At the top sat the freeborn family, the chieftain, his wife, their sons and daughters. Beneath them were the retainers, warriors loyal to the household. Beneath them, the thralls' slaves taken in raids. The pregnant captives were thrust into this lowest tier, forced to labor, their swollen bodies slowing them but never sparing them. Picture the scene: a woman sweeping the longhouse floor, her belly heavy, her chains clinking with each step. Children of the household laugh and jeer, pointing at her. She keeps her eyes down, silent. Another woman carries water, the weight straining her back. She stumbles, the bucket spilling, and a warrior snarls, raising his hand. She braces for the blow, her unborn child trembling within her. Would you have endured it in silence, or risked rebellion, knowing it could cost not only your life, but your child's? And still, there were moments of humanity. The chieftain's wife, herself a mother, might watch the pregnant captive with eyes both hard and soft. Some wives despised the captives, seeing them as threats. Others pitied them, offering scraps of food, a blanket, a whispered kindness in the dark. These small mercies could mean survival. They could mean the difference between life and death. But mercy was fickle, and fear was constant. For every child born in a longhouse brought questions of fate. Was it an heir, a servant, or a curse? The fate of the mother hung on the answer. The chapter closes with tension rising. A captive woman, her time come, labors in the shadows of the longhouse. The fire crackles, the warriors feast, the wife watches silently. All hold their breath as the child's cry breaks through the hall. And with that cry, the fate of both mother and child is sealed not by choice, not by mercy, but by superstition and survival. Night in the longhouse was never silent. The wind rattled the timber walls, dogs barked outside, and the fire hissed as wet logs spat sparks into the air. Yet within that noise there was another rhythm, the shallow breaths of captive women, the groans of labor, the faint cries of infants born into chains. For the Vikings, these sounds were not just life, they were omens, threads of fate woven into the fabric of their hall. The Volva arrived when the air turned heavy. She was the seeress, the prophetess, the woman whose words could guide warriors and topple kings. Her staff clicked against the floor as she entered, her cloak thick with feathers and beads that rattled like bones. All eyes followed her. The chieftain leaned forward. His wife sat rigid. The thralls trembled. For when the Volva spoke, it was as though the gods themselves whispered through her. She looked first at the captives. Her gaze lingered on the swollen bellies, the infants cradled in weary arms. She muttered words no one dared repeat, her fingers tracing symbols in the smoke. Then she struck her staff against the ground. These children, she hissed, carry the blood of the conquered. They are poison and prophecy both. Ignore them, and doom will fall on this hall. The room grew cold. Warriors shifted uneasily, some clutching their amulets of Thor's hammer, others staring at the floor. The pregnant captives lowered their eyes, but inside, their hearts pounded. They knew what prophecy meant. Prophecy demanded sacrifice. Would you, in their place, have prayed the vulva would overlook you? Or would you have wished she saw your child as a blessing, even if it meant being claimed by a fate you could not control? The chronicles hint at such moments, but never tell them plainly. In the Ynglinga saga, sacrifices of humans are recorded at Uppsala's great temple. Men hanged, women drowned, children offered to ensure the harvest. But what of pregnant women? The silence in the texts is louder than words. Yet, archaeology suggests answers. At bog sites in Denmark, the remains of women have been found who were pregnant at death, their bodies preserved in peat, their unborn children still within them. These were not accidents. These were rituals. Imagine the scene. The longhouse emptied, the captives dragged to the sacred grove. The air is heavy with pine and blood. Wooden idols of Thor and Freyr loom in the firelight, their carved eyes unblinking. The vulva raises her staff, chanting. Warriors drum their shields. And in the center, a pregnant woman kneels, her hands bound, her eyes fixed on the dark sky above. She whispers not to the gods of her captors, but to her own, the gods of the temple that once protected her. Her unborn child stirs within her, as though restless with the knowledge of what is to come. Some were drowned in wells, their bodies offered to the spirits of water. Others were buried beneath thresholds, their deaths believed to guard the household from misfortune. Some, most terrible of all, were cut open, their unborn children given as offerings in a single moment of double sacrifice. The Vikings believed such acts held immense power. 2 lives, bound together, surrendered in one ritual. Was it not the ultimate gift to the gods? The motif of silence haunts us here again. These women could not scream their stories into the sagas. Their names were never carved into runes. Their children never drew breath. Yet their silence shaped belief, for each sacrifice was remembered not as a crime, but as a bond between men and gods. Now ask yourself, if you had been the chieftain's wife, watching as these women were led to the grove, would you have turned away in disgust, told yourself it was necessary to keep your family safe? But prophecy could cut both ways. The vulva did not always demand death. Sometimes she saw survival in the unborn. In sagas of Iceland, there are whispers of captives whose children were raised not as thralls, but as heirs, marked as chosen by the gods. To spare one child was to risk inviting both fortune and disaster, for a child born of conquest carried a destiny no one could predict. Picture a winter night. Snow drifts against the longhouse. A captive woman lies in labor, her chains loosened only for the birth. The vulva hovers nearby, muttering charms, her eyes bright with visions. The child is born, small, silent, then crying. The seeress raises her staff and declares that the boy carries the shadow of kingship. The hall gasps. The chieftain stares, torn between pride and dread. For if the prophecy is true, the blood of his enemies has become the seed of his future. And what of the mother? Her silence remains. She has given life, but she will never see freedom. Her child is no longer hers, belongs to the hall, to the gods, to fate. The chapter builds to its climax with a clash of terror and reverence. In one hall, a woman is sacrificed, her body hung in the sacred grove. In another, A child born of captivity is declared chosen, his cries echoing through the night. Both women vanish into silence, one through death, the other through erasure. Yet both fates remind us of the same truth. In Viking belief, unborn life was never meaningless. It was power, danger, and prophecy. The fire burns low. The vulva departs, her staff trailing sparks across the floor. The warriors drink in silence, uneasy with what they have seen. The captives huddled together, their eyes wide, their bellies heavy. Outside, the gods loom larger than the night. The hearth burned low in the longhouse, its embers smoldering like the last pulse of a dying heart. Fear still lingered in the rafters from the rituals of the vulva. Too many omens had been declared, too many warnings whispered. Warriors drank less, laughed less, and when their eyes drifted to the pregnant captives, they turned away as if staring too long might call down the wrath of the gods. The chieftain's council murmured of solutions. Some said the captives should be killed quickly, cleanly, before misfortune fell. Others said their labor could not be wasted. But it was the vulva who spoke the final judgment. Her staff struck the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. "Exile them," she said. "Send them into the sea. If the gods wish them dead, the waves will claim them. If the gods wish them spared, let their survival be their fate." And so, betrayal was cloaked as mercy. The women were led to the shore under the cover of night. Their chains were removed, but only so they could row. A small boat waited in the surf, its hull stocked with a few sacks of barley, salted fish, and water casks. It was not kindness, it was dismissal. The warriors pushed the boat out, their faces masks of fear and relief. For them, this was not abandonment, it was cleansing. Now picture it. The moon, silver on the waves, the boat drifting from shore, the captives huddled together. Among them, bellies heavy, children restless within the womb. They whispered, not to their captors, but to each other, voices weaving into chants, soft as the tide. Would you, in that moment, have wept at the betrayal? Or would you have seen it as freedom? The first time in months when no hand held your chain. No, I marked you as property. The sea was merciless. Days turned to nights, nights into days. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, despair pressed down like iron. Some wept, some prayed, some rocked silently with the rhythm of the waves. But in their silence, a strange strength emerged. They began to care for each other, tending to the weak, sharing scraps of food, holding each other when the pain of labor began, and then land. Jagged cliffs rose out of the mist, black against the horizon. A beach of stone, waves crashing hard. They beached the boat, stumbling ashore, exhausted, their bellies heavy, their eyes hollow. Exile had not killed them. Exile had remade them. In foreign lands, their stories split like branches of a tree. Some reached the Orkneys, where sagas whisper of strange women who arrived from the sea, seeresses who spoke of storms and death. Others reached Ireland, their children born with blood that carried both conqueror and conquered, weaving into dynasties that would shape kingdoms. Still others disappeared entirely, swallowed by bogs, forests, and silence. But archaeology leaves hints. In graves in the Isles, women of foreign origin have been found buried with charms of both Norse and native tradition beads, mixed with local talismans, bones of infants buried beside them. These were not merely thralls. These were women who became founders, their exile transforming them from victims into mothers of new bloodlines. Imagine one such woman, her body weak from childbirth, yet her child alive in her arms. She walks the rocky shore, each step leaving prints in the sand. Behind her lies exile, betrayal, abandonment. Before her lies survival. She has no name in the sagas, no stone carved for her memory. Yet her descendants will live, will grow, will tell stories of origins shrouded in mystery. Would you, if you had been her, clung to the gods of your youth? Or would you have built new gods from the stones and waves, praying to any spirit that would grant your child life? Exile was never merciful. Many perished, their bones left to the tides. But those who endured carried something greater than vengeance. They carried continuity. Their children, born of conquest and betrayal, became threads woven into the fabric of nations. Through them, the silence of forgotten women turned into the voice of history. The chapter closes on a haunting image. A woman standing on a rocky cliff at dawn. Her child in her arms, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She is no longer a captive, no longer a sacrifice. She is an exile turned into a founder, her silence transformed into survival. History often pretends to be clean. Chronicles name kings, trace battles, count silver, and carve runestones to boast of victory. But beneath those polished lines lies the raw truth, so dark it was scrubbed from memory. The fate of the pregnant women taken after Viking invasions was one such truth. They were erased, yet they remain. Their silence haunts the edges of every saga. Think of it in the Chronicles of Fulda, in the Icelandic sagas, in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. There are endless details of raids, flames, and slaughter. But when it comes to the pregnant women, the most vulnerable, silence falls, too deliberate to be chance. Their absence is the mark of censorship. And yet, history leaves fingerprints, even where names are missing. In genetic studies of populations across the British Isles, Orkneys, and Iceland, we see foreign maternal lines mingled with Norse blood. The women who were carried across the seas, whose pregnancies marked them as cursed or sacred, survived through their children. Blood remembers even when stone does not. Imagine one such line, a woman carried from a temple in Northumbria, heavy with child. She survives the crossing, survives the longhouse, survives exile. Her son grows into a warrior, half Norse. His descendants migrate to Ireland, and 100 years later, his bloodline feeds into the kingship of Leinster. In the Chronicles, he is remembered as a warlord. Of his mother, nothing is said, and yet without her, he would never have existed. Would you, listening now, dare to say she was erased? Or would you admit she is everywhere in the blood, in the bone, in the whisper of every dynasty that rose in the shadows of Viking conquest? The silence of these women became power. Their unborn children were feared as curses, revered as omens, used as sacrifices, or raised as heirs. And so their memory lingers in paradox. They were erased, but indispensable, forgotten, yet foundational. But why were their names never written? Because to write them would have been to acknowledge their power, to admit that women enslaved, silenced, pregnant, had shaped the course of nations, to admit that conquest was not clean, that the womb carried consequences the sword could not control. So chroniclers looked away, ink fell silent, and centuries passed without their stories. And yet, here we are, breaking that silence. Picture the closing image, the ruins of a Viking hall, its stones moss-covered, its rafters long since collapsed. The wind whispers through the timbers, carrying echoes of cries never written down. In that silence, you can almost hear them, the women who carried life through fire, sea, exile, and death. Their names may be lost, but their legacy is immortal. If you were standing in that hall now, hearing those whispers, would you look away like the chroniclers? Or would you dare to speak their story, knowing it changes everything we thought we knew about the Vikings? The truth is this: the fate of pregnant women after Viking invasions was not just tragedy, was transformation. Through suffering came survival. Through silence came prophecy, and through erasure came legacy. The children they bore shaped dynasties, kingdoms, and myths. Their blood flows still, hidden in the veins of millions, and that is why this story matters today, because every forgotten voice reminds us that history is never whole, that the truth lies not only in what is remembered, but in what was silenced, and to honor the silenced is to make history whole again.